Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most outrageous reason someone filed for divorce? I worked at a law office where the owner would talk about the man who sued for divorce because his wife would no longer allow him to use a loaded gun as a marital aid. She had apparently agreed to it at some point and was fine with the gun as long as it was empty, but that just wasn't good enough for him. If I'm understanding this correctly, and oh boy, I hope I'm not, marital aid means adult toy here? A gun? A loaded gun? And the man thinks this is a problem. Okay.
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD, which manifested primarily financially, so he made their lives a penny-pinching hell. Examples: he was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times, and you had to get 1 square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than 1 square. Wife finally got fed up and left him when 1. He gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2. Their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega-Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. Story 3. Wasn't the reason, but did happen during the course of the divorce. Neither side would follow the court orders. When they had to go back to court, they were fighting over a pistol and the man's grandmother's bowls. I assumed for weeks that these bowls were some sort of heirloom or expensive china. When they finally brought the bowls in to swap, they were frickin' Tupperware. Story 4. I dropped into court to visit a family friend who was a judge and had quite a treat. A wealthy area farmer and his wife were in court that day fighting about possessions/assets. The judge had had enough. After briefly reviewing the history of their case, he offered the couple one last opportunity to retire to a conference room and come to an agreement. Both refused. Their lawyers were clearly as weary as the judge. The judge then asks each party which room in their house was their favorite room. She picked the kitchen and he picked his gun room. The judge then informed them that because the matter had dragged on for so long with both behaving like children, he was going to decide the matter of the property. She was awarded everything in the kitchen and he the gun room. Everything else was to be sold at auction with the profits equally divided. Then the judge told them, "Now neither of you are happy, right?" They clearly were not. Story 5. Not a divorce lawyer, but used to practice criminal defense work. Once had a heavily pregnant client that attacked her husband, of less than a year, with an iron. Said client was now sitting in a police cell, sobbing and insisting that her husband deserved it and she wanted a divorce. I asked what he had supposedly done, assuming he'd been cheating or something. Turns out she'd checked his phone and found a single adult site in his browsing history from over 2 years beforehand. Not the most pleasant thing to discover, but hardly worth battering him half to death and demanding a divorce. How do people like this even get married? I don't get it. Something like, okay, when thinking about someone who had taken action like beat their spouse nearly to death with an iron because they found an adult site, I don't think of a very pleasant person. Yet someone found that person and was like, yes, I would like to spend my whole life with this person. Maybe they were just really good at hiding it. Who knows? Story 6. He was frustrated by her hoarding. She was frustrated by his utter uselessness. He filed for divorce and she was my client. Her prized possession was a room or two full of scrapbooking materials. His prized possession was a yard full of junk cars that he never worked on. They had no children and no real assets. They hated each other more than any 2 people I had ever met. And the only terms they would agree to were these. He gets the scrapbooking stuff, and she gets the cars. My client also took the house, as he had no income and didn't want it anyway. It was the shortest divorce decree I ever drafted. I intentionally squeezed it onto 1 page, and the judge and I had a good laugh over it. Once the decree was signed and filed, she hauled all the scrapbooking stuff to the yard, and he removed it to the dump. She then called a junk shop I referred her to and had all of his cars removed from her yard. Story 7. He got drunk at the wedding. She did not like it and decided to divorce him right after the honeymoon, which she went to without him. Moreover, this was all an elaborate scheme of divorce robbery because this guy was loaded, and so was his entire family. They were loaded because they were a family of excellent lawyers. And he was a 3rd-generation lawyer with all the smarts and experience of his predecessors combined. Let's just say this didn't go well for her. Of all the people to try and gold dig from, wrong choice. At least wrong choice if you were planning on divorcing to get it, because that's just stupid. You know who handles divorces? Lawyers. Story 8. My client put his wife in an assisted living facility based on a misdiagnosis, the medication of which caused the wife to be unable to care for herself. While in the facility, my client, shocker, started dating another woman, and methinks began using hard drugs. He used a lot of money on both of these things. She eventually got off the medication and got better. Suffice to say, she was not happy about what had transpired. Story 9. Failed exorcisms. Client had an inner ear condition that caused chronic vertigo, but symptoms could be treated with medication. Husband was an evangelical who was convinced his wife had become possessed and that her vertigo and general crankiness with his methods were evidence of demonic possession, and the medication she was taking was enabling the devil to hide inside of her. Therefore, the only proper recourse was an exorcism. He would hide her meds until she got dizzy and then try various methods of exorcism. This included sweating it out, put under blankets while incapacitated and locked in a room full of space heater, freezing it out, pretty much the reverse with AC fans and bags of ice, surprising it out. He would jump out and scare her like it was the hiccups, but instead of yelling boo, he would recite the Lord's Prayer or Psalms. But the final straw was that he tried to surprise it out of her by pushing her down the stairs when they were heading out for dinner. Note, this guy was some type of executive and they still went out to dinner after the stairs incident. She asked for the divorce at an Applebee's that night. I have often tried to picture that conversation as she was adamant that he was a total sweetheart and never acted out of malice or anger. Now, I'm no expert on expelling evil spirits, but these just sound like torture with extra steps. And not even that, it's torture that would only affect the human body, no spirits whatsoever. You're telling me this guy thinks that spirits can get cold? Get real. Story 10. I used to work in a general practice firm, and the guy that worked across the hallway from me was a family law attorney. He was a good attorney, but every day I would hear him yelling on the phone at his clients. One day I asked him why he did it, when it was obviously stressful in a non-legal work type of way. He pointed out that there's one chapter of statutes dedicated to it, and you need to know a little civil procedure, and that's about it. It's an amazing segment of business. Not only is it not that difficult from an intellectual rigor perspective, but holy crap. Those family law attorneys make serious bank for being willing to put up with the headaches. I would routinely hear him yelling at clients like, "Don't go over there. I'm instructing you to not go over there. If you go over there, I will fire you as a client, and when you go to jail, I won't take your call." For the record, this was in a fairly affluent suburb. Most of the disputes that would drive him into my office for a break would revolve around parents wanting to know the recourse for ex-hubby dropping the kids off 4 minutes earlier than agreed and how the client planned to get even. I also recall one time a client had gotten his cell phone number and called him on a Saturday evening with some emergency. Spoiler, his ex had done something egregious, like took the kids to the pool without his consent. So on Monday morning, the attorney sent the client an invoice for $500 for a Saturday phone call, which probably lasted like 5 minutes. He did it so the guy would call him and say, "What's this?" And then the attorney could explain to him that that is what he charges for non-emergency weekend calls. This time he'd waive it, but if he ever did it again, he could be sure to get a bill that he would end up paying. Story 11. Staff attorney for a judge. Not a divorce, but a custody modification hearing. Ex-wife wanted sole L&P custody of the kids because the ex-husband was spending all of his money on a palm reader/psychic and refused to pay child support. On cross, ex-wife's attorney got him to admit that he was spending all his discretionary income on the psychic. He said he had spent over $5,000 on readings and other services there. Judges frequently chime in with questions in domestic matters, so my judge asked why he was not paying support as his divorce decree required. His explanation was, 1, the psychic could read that his children were provided for without his money, and 2, he would be able to repay the ex when he takes the children to Mexico permanently to seek great riches there, which the judge read as, "My psychic told me to kidnap my kids." What made this guy think it was a good idea to tell the judge in court that you are going to kidnap your children? At a custody hearing, by the way. A custody hearing. The exact thing you're talking about. I also wonder what these readings said. Because the only thing I can imagine that would be remotely accurate would be, yes, your palm, this line right here says that you're going to be poor. Story 12. I knew a guy from a high school job who divorced his wife of 2 months because she would sleep with a nightlight, but he could only sleep in total darkness, as they apparently never lived together until after getting married. He hated her nightlight so much that he would often sleep on the couch instead, but sometimes he would claim the bed for himself and lock her out of the bedroom for the night. This was an eccentric, late 40s man working at a Burger King who acted like all the high school coworkers he had were his best chums, and often told us these weird stories. I'm glad I don't work with him anymore. Story 13. I'm a lawyer that handles quite a few divorces, among other things, and I've seen all sorts of reasons for marriages ending. The only thing that is consistently true and relevant to this question is that it is never for just one reason, and it is never one-sided. In fact, I've started telling potential clients in our initial interview that I am well aware that I'm going to uncover some dirt on my client in the process. Not to scare them, but to put their mind at ease that I've seen worse. The fact that you haven't been 100% an angel up to this point doesn't scare me, and I'd just rather find out about it from my client beforehand than later on from their spouse at the worst possible moment. All this is just to say that when you hear people divorcing over one stupid argument or mistake, usually that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. That said, some of the lighter straws I've seen include a guy who is 100% convinced that his wife, our client, is actually a lesbian in love with his sister and just using him as a cover, but he also claims that she is banging me to pay for her legal fees, and also with every male whose phone number is in her call history. A woman who is divorcing my client because he was too sad after his father died last year. My client had to break down her door to get his father's ashes a few weeks after he left the house, and she refused to let him back in or give them to him. And a woman who claims my client was emotionally abusive towards her because he refused to yell at her, and sat in silence ignoring her when she screamed at him. He had this recorded and time-stamped for the dates and times that she insists the incidents occurred, and she's listened to them and his complete silence as she goes on tirades and insists this proves her point that he was emotionally distant and abusive. Story 14. I got into scams because of a lawyer in my old office represented a woman whose husband left her because she got involved in a romance scam that started as a pen pal. It was a weird marriage. He was clearly a closeted gay man who married her for her money because she was ugly as all hell. They kept separate lives for 30 years. She began corresponding with someone she believed was a 3-star general serving in Afghanistan. It went the typical way scams like this do. She fell in love and he needed money to move from Afghanistan back to the United States. She eventually would transfer him about $70,000 over the course of 8 months. Even when my friend brought me into the conference room to lay out the case as being a scam, for which I had piles of proof for, she continued to transfer money, including an $8,000 transfer the day after. The judge ruled she owed her husband dollar for dollar what she gave the scammer. So $70,000, plus he issued a temporary restraining order barring her from transferring marital assets. My friend dumped her as a client when she showed interest in appealing the TRO and trying to expedite her divorce so she could marry the scammer. Some people who fall for these love scams really just fall hard, huh? What a horrifying thing to have to witness, like seeing someone just give everything away to this obvious scammer that they just can't recognize. That's terrible. Story 16. Most people are interpreting outrageous as an overblown minor annoyance, but I'll put one out there on the other end. When I was working at the DA's office, there was a woman who had banged her son's 15-year-old friend. The awkward part was that her husband was the high school baseball coach for both of the boys. My job at the time involved going through the evidence, including all of the text messages, where they eventually decided upon divorce. The only thing I really recall is that the man interrupted the text conversation about the affair to say, "BRB, I'm going to get a McRib." The texting resumed about 40 minutes later. Needless to say, criminal law is weird and I decided to pursue another specialty. I can't be the only one who thinks that McRib is code for something, right? Or at least a cover for him going to do some cheating of his own. Like, who takes 40 minutes to go get a McRib? Or I guess he probably got it and ate it if it did happen, but I don't know. It's suspicious. I'm not saying it would even be wrong either. The marriage was super over at that point. Story 17. I do my student practice at my family's law firm. Young woman filed for divorce because her husband drank 1 beer during weekdays after a day of work. The guy wasn't violent, doing drugs, or anything like that. He was just a normal, polite guy who liked to have a cold one after a 10-hour shift. They are a very good couple and argue so rarely that this woman's friends told her to write down everything he did to upset her and reread it every day, so she had reasons to be angry about. My mom, lawyer, set the woman straight, told her he's just doing what all guys do, and to find herself new friends instead of ones ready to sabotage their marriage. Story 18. I'm an intern, but the judge I work for used to do divorce work. He has some crazy stories, but this one is probably the most outrageous. Though the divorce was really justified. Every morning, this couple would sit in the bathroom together while one of them had their morning dump. One would sit on the toilet and the other on the rim of the bathtub. This particular morning, the wife was on the toilet and husband was on the edge of the tub. They started to argue about their relationship, so the wife reaches down, pulls her tampon out, and flings it at the husband. I'm told that the tampon stuck for a brief second to his forehead before sliding off. He filed for divorce that same day or the next. Story 19. Not the most outrageous, but I had a client incur about 20 additional hours of billable hours because he and his ex-wife were battling and went to trial over their Star Wars collection. This was the only real issue at trial. They were able to work out custody, child support, the house, but the Star Wars collection went to trial. The judge ended up splitting it up in the most a-hole-ish way possible, basically giving each side half of what they wanted and then mixing and matching everything else, effectively breaking up the collection. When speaking about it at a conference, the judge admitted that she did it because if they were going to act like children, she was going to treat them like children. The thing is, the value of this collection was over $100,000, so hardly kid stuff. Neither side had it in them to appeal, nor was the case law on either side given judicial discretion in property distribution. Story 20. Not necessarily the most outrageous reason, but definitely some outrageous conduct. The saddest divorce we were hired to do, but ended up not doing for reasons that'll become apparent, was a woman in her 50s whose husband had really just let himself go. He was over 400 pounds, just did his third triple bypass, refused to do anything different, and just smoked and drank all day while watching TV. His doctors told him he was going to die in 6 months if he didn't change his behavior. He told them they were all morons and could go to hell. Meanwhile, his wife is this successful woman who is making over $10,000 a month on her hobby while making 6 figures in her normal work. She lost all respect for him, all desire, and all love by watching his decline. For the past few years, she can barely stand him. It also sounded like there was some verbal abuse going on where he would constantly accuse her of cheating, and gaslighting her while cheating himself throughout their marriage, and spending all of his money on coke, the usual. His accusations ramped up considerably once she lost about 200 pounds the good old-fashioned way. We were working on her divorce, and one of her provisions was that he keep her as the beneficiary on his life insurance for obvious reasons. She assured us that he would agree to everything she suggested in the paperwork if she talked him through it. One day we get an email from her saying to halt the divorce. Not because they were reconciling, but because he refused to keep her as the beneficiary on his life insurance if they divorced. So she stopped the divorce, just so that she could get the benefits when he inevitably dies in a few months. We've had one where the opposing party husband found out his old wife, late 70s, was terminally ill. He started using every tactic in the book to delay the final hearing, just so that she would die before their divorce was finalized and he wouldn't have to lose anything. We just got another where the couple agreed to everything beforehand, signed documents, agreed to a dissolution, and how to share custody. Now the husband has a vengeance boner and wants to trash the dissolution, take everything from her, and take away their kid. Why? Because she told him no when he asked for their kid a full day and night ahead of schedule when she had already made plans with the kid. How is this man, who was 400 pounds, cheating on his wife? With all due respect, this man does not sound bangable. I don't know how else to say it. Is just true. I guess there's someone out there for everyone in that kind of way, but it's just weird to me. Story 21. My aunt was dating an unemployed dude for a while. He was staying in her house rent-free. They got married and were getting ready to go on the honeymoon when the new husband tells her that he's not going because he has to take care of his plants at home. Big fight. Aunt goes on the honeymoon with her sisters instead. She comes home and tries to kick him out of her house. He refuses to leave. She tries to get the police involved. Dude is live streaming on Facebook how he is being trapped in his own home. Police tell my aunt there's basically nothing they can do, but she can file for eviction after divorce. Dude gets to live in her house with his precious plants for like 3 months until everything legally gets worked out.